start with a behind the curtain moment. Generally speaking, I have been recording these in advance when an idea comes to me and then simply scheduling them to appear on the 18th of the next month. However, I got a book in the post on the 7th of September because I wrote an article that appears in the book and thought I'd like to talk about this. So the episode I had recorded on the concept of usable histories has got to be bumped. I don't want to work on recording more than one of these a month, and I'm sure you don't want to hear more than one of these a month. And instead, I'm going to race around trying to get this recorded and edited in time to take its place. You'll have to wait a while to hear my opinion on Rita Gross and feminist studies. I gave a talk in Chicago in 2016, which was a very nice trip. It's a lovely campus, and my partner really wanted an American-style shower curtain, so I had a good walk around the city attempting to find one. I wasn't sure exactly when the book resulting from that conference would arrive, but I did see the final proofs earlier this year. The first thing to say is it's nowhere near as chunky as the Amazon picture implies. The second thing to say is that while the original conference did feel very much like it was focused on Afghanistan, the book feels like its main focus is the Kushan Empire, which included but was not limited to Afghanistan from the 1st to the 4th century AD. 3 of the papers are directly on the Kushans. 1 includes the Kushans in a broader recap, and 1 is on a successor state. There are 2 papers which I think focus mostly on documents from parts of Afghanistan, and 1 each on Achaemenids and Greeks in Bactria. Again, those overlap but aren't exactly the same as Afghanistan. There is 1 paper by Thomas Barfield which does take as its central focus Afghanistan, and Barfield is an excellent writer, so I'm looking forward to reading that. I think it is interesting that the contributions have sort of refocused the volume from the way that the original conference was intended. And though I've yet to read everything, this is probably a volume worth getting if you are interested in the early centuries AD in South and Central Asia. Though it's unfortunately, like most of these things, on the pricey side. Anyway, this is not a review. I'm going to talk a little bit about the paper I wrote, and then I'm going to highlight something that occurred to me having received the book when I thought about another paper that was published this year. My paper is responding to a book by James Scott, in which he argued that for most of human history, most people have not lived in large, centralized states. That when we focus on large, centralized states like the Kushan Empire, we are projecting a modern assumption about how human beings organized themselves back into the past. He argued that imperial powers struggled to control geographically fragmented regions where stable agriculture was not the norm, such as the many mountainous or forested regions of Afghanistan or Pakistan. Scott's book challenged historians to think about the people who existed at the peripheries of states and who resisted incorporation in them. And the organisers asked me to address that challenge in relation to the Kushan period. I thought that was a great idea. But, as I say at the start of the paper, in practice, I doubted it was possible because the historiography of Kushan studies has centred so firmly around the Kushan state that it can't easily be escaped. Its sub-disciplines are literally predicated on the assumption that the object of study will be urban state-related phenomena, coins, writing, sculpture, and escaping that is genuinely very difficult. It's not something you do just in one paper. So instead, I set about reconstructing, so far as the evidence will allow, the Kushan Empire, starting at the centre, the dynasty after whom modern historians name the political unit, then working outwards from there. First to the officials who answer to them, then through the evidence for how effective imperial control was, and finally out to the peripheral regions to see what sort of answer to Scott's challenge might be possible, but working from where the evidence is strong to where it is weak, rather than the danger of ending up with a very airy-fairy theoretical paper if you'd started out in the peripheral area. Based on that re-examination of the evidence, I drew a variety of conclusions. I found some of Scott's arguments compelling and some less so, and I wrote in the final section that The spaces around the Kushans were occupied by a wide variety of state-like formations, and probably also an equally wide variety of non-state peoples. It is clear that Kushan historiography has not given us a good picture of the administrative and political realities that contemporaries lived under. As part of that revision of my own thoughts, I suggested, though I think the evidence is too weak to confirm it, that the Kushan Empire may have had two parallel structures of administration. One which answered directly to the king's court and exercised very effective control over certain aspects of life, and another based on already existing administrations which was more loosely controlled, much more regional, and probably governed the majority of activity. Actually, this is a theme that several of the papers in the volume looked at. Ryan King's paper, Local Power Brokers in Iranian and Post-Iranian Bactria, suggests a similar idea, that beneath the constant change of large empires, there might be much more stable local dynasts. I've not yet had a chance to read it, so I'm looking forward to that one. That would be the end of this, except for another paper that was published this year, which made me think about how that summary might reinforce a common misconception about the nature of historical study. And that is the idea that history is mostly about reinterpreting things. After all, nothing ever changes in the past, so when historical opinions change, it must surely be a result of some new insight, a clever theory, or new way of thinking about things, like, for example, Scott's theory that we give too much attention to large states. And this is not just a popular misconception. In writing about the nature of historical study, the philosopher R.G. Collingwood thought the same thing, that new interpretations came primarily from looking afresh at already well-known facts whose implications had been previously overlooked. And this is completely wrong. The article that made me think about this was published by Mark Allen. It was actually published this year, though the journal is the 2019 issue. And this will take a little bit of explanation. Since the mid-1990s, there have been several discoveries of written documents in Afghanistan and Pakistan. One group of these are written in the local language, Gandhari, and appear to come from the archives of Buddhist institutions. In most cases, they are religious texts. Obviously, we've known for a long time that Buddhist monasteries had more than just religious texts in them, but overwhelmingly the texts that have been found so far are religious in nature. But not this one. This one is an accounting document recording donations, including by a Kushan king. And though there is circumstantial evidence that the Kushan kings offered patronage to Buddhism, this is the first piece of evidence that indicates a direct donation. Previously, evidence of direct patronage was restricted to royal temples, which featured Iranian gods, or to the Indian Brahmins. In fact, the disconnect between pious Buddhist legends about Kushan kings and our actual evidence has always caused some problems of interpretation. It's also one more document about the topic I was looking at, how the state actually functioned, what the king, or the court, or officials, or subordinate rulers concerned themselves with. Doubly interesting in this case because, as I explain in the article, there is some evidence to suggest that the region in which the donation was made was still nominally ruled by the descendants of the kings of Odi, who had at one time been independent rulers. The existence of Alon's article suggests, and it is a really good article. If you're interested in these topics, then well worth a read. I'll see if I can find a link to include in the comments below. There is a constant drip of new data coming into the field. In this case, Alon first gave a presentation on it in 2017, which is why I didn't know about it to include in my own article. This was so new, I simply couldn't have accessed it. But it wasn't the only new data I was using. At least 3 of the administrative positions I based my argument on were entirely unknown before the 1950s. And, I counted, 65 of the publications listed in my bibliography were published in the last 20 years. So they were published after I first started working on Indian history. And that is the much less glamorous truth about historical interpretation. We just get new data. and it takes time to incorporate that. New insights are important, but they are far more often driven by the data. People asking how do you make sense of evidence their predecessors didn't have, rather than displaying some piercing brilliance on their part. In this case, what happened was that I simply gathered all of the information about Kushan officials in one place. And of course, that included all the information that was new since the last time anybody had seriously looked at this problem, which is quite a few decades ago, and noticed that it seemed to be falling into two parts, and I needed an insight to explain that. There wasn't any real brilliance to it, just the reality that I had more data than any of my predecessors. How do we reconcile that with the idea that nothing ever changes in the past? Well, the answer is that historians don't study the past. They never have. They produce reconstructions of it. What they study is the extant sources, the evidence that has survived, been curated, catalogued and published. And that extant material is changing all the time. Far from Collingwood's assumption and the popular misconception of a static object of study, history is much more like trying to hit a moving target.